going to be a tale of two stories. One is ancient, and one is still in progress. Both of them are set right here in our beloved Lebanon, and both are stories about desire. Now, could this be a TEDx talk about sex? Well, it might be. It's possible. Probably not. But now you're going to have to stick with me to find out. You see, the modern day story started about 2 years ago. A group of us was having dinner, and we were talking about teaching ethics and how this is getting increasingly difficult to do so because people are becoming completely self-obsessed. I mean, to the extent that last year, the Oxford English Dictionary made selfie its word of the year. And yet with all this talk about self, we tend to forget that what we actually call ourself is made up of all these connections that we have with other people. And there used to be people who gave their time and sometimes even their lives to contemplating this idea of how we are when we're with other people. It was called ethics. And it was about how to live a good and noble life, one where we're more than just connected to others. We're somehow also a bit responsible for their well-being, their welfare. And yet in this age of the selfie, it just seems like many of our real human connections are fading. They're being replaced with this obsessive concern that we have about our network connections between our cell phones. So ethics in this context, it seems like some quaint old idea for the dusty libraries of philosophers or college professors even. But with the massive financial failures we've seen at our banks, shootings in our schools, scandals from our religious leaders, and the endless greed and corruption in our governments, ethics is once again taking a center stage, with ethics courses and institutes cropping up everywhere, from college boardrooms to college classrooms. It was like some alarm clock went off and everybody went like, oh my God, we missed this Ethics 101 class, and now we're all scrambling to catch up. And so on that fateful night, as we continued our conversation, we realized that even within a very diverse group of us, we were all being asked in some way if and how we could teach ethics to others. And so with this dilemma in mind, we decided that we were going to get together every Friday at the AUB Business School under the banner of what we called the Beirut Ethics Colloquium. And we started our quest by diving into the classics as handed down to us by the great moral masters such as Aristotle, Kant, and Mill. But we quickly realized that these recipes in our modern day context were in need of some new and maybe spicier ingredients. I mean, after all, how could we explain why we humans are so driven by greed and lust and power, even when the societal rules are clear and punishment is certain? I mean, there was this obvious disconnect between when we choose to do the right thing and when we choose to do what we think we might get away with. And so the question became, what is the dynamic that gets us to act ethically with one another? And that's where the ancient story comes in. Because quite unexpectedly and very obscurely, this courageous woman and her song of desire crossed our paths. You see, after weeks of breaking our heads on all of the philosophies of ethics, we decided we were going to just take a weekend out, go out to the Bekaa Valley, relax a little bit in nature, and explore this ancient text in the Old Testament that's known as the Song of Songs. Now, the Song of Songs has been called many things. It's been called a poem, a love story, even biblical pornography. I mean, finding this text in the Bible was like finding a Beyonce track on some old Beethoven record. I mean, this was written hundreds of years before Christ. It could have been set right here in the vineyards and villages of Lebanon. And ironically, there's no mention of God. There are no clear moral instructions. This is just an exchange between two lovers, exploding in desire for one another, elevating each other with their words and longing and yearning for one another. So we immediately wanted to understand what was the meaning of this. I mean, who wrote this and what's it doing in the Bible in the first place? And yet all of this was turned on its head when we were told that there would be no answers, and that even our questions would become irrelevant. Because this poem, like desire itself, was not meant to be dissected and understood. It was meant to be experienced. And indeed, what emerged was something much greater than an understanding. It was this letting go of our tendency to always fight over who has that right answer that gave way to this shift, where we found that many of our personal roles and our expertise was of little importance relative to this something that we had created together. Indeed, it was like something had passed between us and left these magnetic threads that connected us in some new and maybe more profound way. So that triggered this second question in my mind. What could it have been in this little story about desire that was able to create that opening in us, that was able to allow us to kind of drop those roles for a minute and to discover something new, something intriguing? And intrigued we were, because from the Song of Songs' opening line, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth," this crazy little story in the Bible had captured this magical transformation that happens when two humans move from being very imperfect strangers to becoming each other's beloved. Now think about this. Close your eyes for a minute. Think about your own beloved. Think about how you love all of those perfect imperfections, how it's even their flaws that somehow make them a bit more interesting, a bit more unique. I mean, after all, how much effort has it ever taken to go running back into the arms of your beloved? Absolutely none. Because in desire, this feeling of letting go, of entering into the flow of being something a bit greater than our daily roles and our fixed schedules, is magnetic and irresistible. So, as we re-entered our weekly ethics meetings, this question really started to nag at me. I mean, how could desire, the way we had experienced it on this retreat, inform notions in modern ethics? I mean, could there be any link? After all, ethics is supposed to be about the rules of moral conduct, the thou shalt nots, the fundamental rights and wrongs, and the universal truths. And desire is exactly its opposite. It's lusty and passionate. It makes our blood boil instead of putting the brakes on our instincts and impulses. And yet this courageous woman's song just wouldn't leave me. There was something in this dynamic nature of desire versus this static nature of ethics that just wouldn't sit right with me. So while I was mulling all of this over, I had a dream about my father. You see, my father died about 15 years ago from a very debilitating case of diabetes. The disease had ravaged his body, and after 3 amputations on his legs, they started talking about cutting off fingers and then his hands, and like all of us, he was terrified of death. But at the end, he was just so ready to move out of that pain and into the light. And so I had this dream about him, and it was one of those remarkable dreams that you know you're dreaming, you know you're in a dream. And in the dream, I knew that he was dead. So I started asking 1,000 questions like, Dad, what happened? What happens when you die? Did you go to heaven? What's heaven like? And at one point, he just turned and he looked me in the eye and he said, Kim, it's all just a big shift in perception. And he was gone. So like all these great and prophetic messages that we receive in life, I just completely ignored this and went diving right back into my exhaustive analysis about desire and ethics. But it was after the next week's colloquium that Dr. Eddie came up to me and he said, Kim, I've been thinking about the Song of Songs. And he said, at the beginning, I was really certain I understood what this was all about. It's just biblical pornography for frustrated priests and nuns. And he laughed and he said, well, that might still be true, but I have to say that while I was out there on that retreat, I had this experience, this connection of being connected to this Lebanon that I live in, to this group of people that had become my friends. And I realized in that moment what the Song of Songs was all about. Because the desire that they sing of was not meant to be understood at all, but it can be experienced. It's just a shift in perception. So there it was again, just a shift in perception. So if this shift in perception is the movement from trying to capture, encapsulate, and understand something to the realization that life and the people in it are meant to be experienced. Because when we start labeling and categorizing people, we turn them into objects, into its. They become a man, a woman, a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, fat, skinny, pretty, ugly. The list just goes on and on. But when we stop and we shift our perception, when we look at somebody in the eyes, we see this unique face. And that's kind of like an invitation to come and discover something new, something intriguing. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas called this the face-to-face encounter. He believed that we must act ethically with one another when we are face-to-face, because the face, in its nudity, in its defenselessness, it calls upon the other, and it asks of them, please, do not kill me. And by this, he didn't mean do not kill me in the literal sense of the word. He meant do not destroy what is life within me by making me just an object in your mind, but offer me your peace and make me someone in your heart instead. Now, this is a pretty radical concept, given our current capabilities to just defriend someone with a click or to break up with a boyfriend by SMS. I mean, how has it gotten so easy for us to disconnect with these real human relations in our lives? Why? Because technology has no face. And Levinas understood that it was the face that creates this shift in perception. Because the face is dynamic. It's moving in real time. And when we're present and we're engaged with someone, you can only get caught up in that dynamic, in that something that moves between us. And it not only connects us, but it also makes us, that dynamic makes us feel a bit more alive. The same kind of alive we feel in desire. It's the eyes, the smile, the laugh, the animation of another human in front of you, another life that's dancing in front of you. Levinas called this something the place where God passes. Isn't that a beautiful idea? Thank you. And so I finally got it. There was indeed a link between desire and ethics, because neither desire nor ethics can exist unless there is this authentic connection to another. And when we become distracted and a bit too self-obsessed, our perception is also limited to these little shortcuts, these quick little mental tricks of categorizing and labeling and judging others. But when we stop and we shift our perception, when we experience the way we do in desire, we can delight in the pleasure of just being there. And you no longer need a moral set of instructions to tell you whether something is good or bad or right or wrong. So maybe, instead of trying to figure out how to teach Ethics 101, we should try a new course and call it People 101. A course on how to experience. Thank you. It'd be a course on how to experience being more open, being more present, how to listen and develop empathy, on how to recognize the fact that all of these artificial roles that we play and cognitively impose on others increase a set of false beliefs about our power and our authority, and how those false beliefs can easily create a world that is narcissistic, indifferent, and comfortably numb. But all good ideas worth spreading need an application in our real lives. And this idea isn't about learning how to become more open. I mean, that's just too abstract. But it can be about catching ourselves when we start shutting down. When we start doing that labeling and categorizing, we can choose to just stop, step back, and look at somebody with a lightness in your eyes, a lightness in your heart, a curiosity about that something that might pass between you, and how that might make you feel a bit more alive every day if you choose. And so now I'm putting the challenge out to all of you. Could this simple shift in perception help to create a more ethical world? Well, I'm not sure. I think it would be kind of fun to try. So today, I'd like to challenge you. Go out, find a face, discover something new, something intriguing. Have a little slice of life with your lunch today. Thank you.